right, well, you know what? Yeah, let's get started. All right. Hello. All right, hi guys. Welcome to the color correction workshop. I'm really excited you guys are all here. This is a very heavy, kind of heady topic, to be honest with you. It's a very technical topic. Color correction, color grading, color science. It is a science. So I tried my best to kind of pare down just bare basics, what you need to know to at least feel comfortable enough to get started. So yeah, we can kind of pull up the agenda real quick just so people can get an idea of what's going on there. So yeah, hopefully I'm going to be kind of running through these at a bit of a rapid pace here because I really want to be able to get closer towards the end where we're actually doing some demos. So yeah, I went out and I shot some examples of some footage with issues, and then we're going to try to fix those issues together. Yeah, I think it's really important to kind of start thinking about how color and color correction is going to weave into your regular editing workflows. So, maybe you're a producer already and you're already creating content, and you just kind of want to figure out how to make your content look a bit better, look a little bit more professional, maybe fix some things that maybe went wrong during production. So yeah, weaving in color correction and color grading into your workflow, super important. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about just how to think about color, and then yeah, a lot of terms, a lot of terminology. Frankly, a lot of terminology that sometimes two words mean the same thing. Sometimes the same word means two things. So I'm gonna kind of try to at least get rid of some of the sense of mystery that comes with color correcting. So yeah, first things first. So this is a color correction and color grading workshop. To be honest, we're probably going to spend 90% of our time on color correction, a little bit talking about color grading, but let's talk about how those two things are different. So color correction is just that. You're correcting errors. So that means if you have footage that you went and shot, maybe some shots look too dark, some shots look too orange, some shots look too green or washed out or whatever, then it'll be during that phase where you kind of create kind of your plutonic ideal of what the best shot in your project is. And you match all the other shots to that one. So that's kind of how that color correcting process works, is that you go through shot by shot and fix all the issues before you get to do the fun part. Well, I mean, maybe all of it's fun. Get to do the more creative part, which is color grading. So yeah, color grading is when you are using color as an artistic tool to create a mood or a look to kind of help convey the story, to kind of change the viewer's perception of that particular scene or moment. You should really kind of be trying to think about color in all stages of the process. So, color correction and color grading, yeah, that changes the color of your projects, plenty. But you should also be thinking about color when you're doing, things like wardrobe, set design, all that good stuff. Props, you kind of already are thinking about color when you are doing your pre-production, at least I hope so. And so color correction, color grading should just be extensions, kind of just adding to what you hopefully already started when you were thinking about your production. Yeah, towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about color theory and kind of how color theory and film making kind of go together and kind of how they tell stories. What color you choose really does change the mood or effect of a story. And this is not just for, like $1 million films. This is for, even your sit-down talk show. What color you choose to put on the back of these curtains has an effect on how the viewer is going to perceive what's happening. So yeah, color is kind of super important, big deal. So yeah. So here's kind of the biggest question that you might have is, well, what do I know if a color is good? How do I know if my image is too dark or too bright or too blue or too orange? And, unfortunately, my answer is there is no absolute yes or no, good or bad. For one, color is subjective. Everybody sees things differently. A project's needs are different from, one thing to the next. So you can't really tell, for complete certainty whether or not something is good or bad. And then to add, even more complications onto that, it's also can be a bit of a problem because no two screens are the same. There's a lot of changes that happen from the object that you shoot to how it goes into the camera, to how that goes into your editing program, to how it then gets exported out and played on whatever monitor, whatever screen that is. So, something looks different when it's on your cell phone, when it's, on a giant LCD screen in an airport to when it's on like your grandma's 30-year-old tube television. You know, those are all 3 different monitors that are going to show your piece in potentially dramatically different ways. So, you know, just keep that in mind that there really is no like absolute yes or wrong, scientific yes or no. And we'll, you know, caveat to that, there are certain tools that do exist that kind of help create somewhat of a baseline. Unfortunately, Premiere Elements does not give us access to those tools. So those are tools like waveform monitors and vector scopes. The cameras that actually we have at can actually show you a waveform monitor on the image as you're recording it. Can we show, I think I have an image of what a waveform monitor is in a vector scope, if we can show that real fast. Let's see, on the right, that's the waveform monitor. So that's just showing you lights and darks. The vector scope is showing you kind of what colors are in your image. It's kind of like a color wheel. And then we've got a histogram and what's called an RGB parade. So these are all technical things that would be lovely to be able to use to kind of help us, you know, make things a little bit more within the barrier of what we know is good. But unfortunately, with Premiere Elements, you kind of are flying without a net. But that's okay, because you can still do a lot, you know, even without these tools. So yeah, so then the next thing I want you guys to know, because I know, yes, you are flying without a net. Yes, you know, maybe you haven't really had very much experience with color. And it seems really daunting when you're like, well, why do I even bother if every monitor looks different? That can be tricky. But I do want you to know that this is a thing that happens to a lot of very professional people. I don't know if you guys are Game of Thrones fans. I was, I guess. But you know, even if you have all the tools at your disposal and you are getting paid multi-millions of dollars to be able to put together a piece, things can still go wrong. So yeah, I don't know if this is a pretty infamous episode where it seemed to be so dark that most viewers at home weren't able to really see what was happening, and they got a lot of flack for it. So just keep that in mind. You know, there's no absolute even with all those tools at your disposal, you know, sometimes people still make mistakes. So, you know, just kind of give yourself the benefit of the doubt there. The next thing I do want to talk about is just kind of how color should weave into your post-production process and kind of how to stay sane during the post-production process. So talking about workflow. So when you get into the post-production phase, you really want to get, before you go to color correction, there's several other ducks you got to have in the row first. And that duck, we kind of refer to it as picture lock. So that means your edit should be picture locked. So that means every image, everything you see, all the content of your video is going to stay that. It's not going to change. So that means you're not swapping one shot out for the next. You know, you're not changing the length. Oh, I'm going to make this one last a little bit longer than the other. Everything, all the image you see is not going to change content-wise. And the reason you do that is because you don't want to be wasting your time, you know, trying to color correct this one shot only to cut it out, you know, 2 days later. So that's kind of why it really is important to make sure that you've made your choices and you're going to stick with it before you move on to the color correction stage. And in that color correction stage, you're going to do what I talked about earlier. You're going to be setting a baseline, you know, setting a neutral, kind of your platonic ideal of what your shot is for the project. So that means it's kind of, generally that shot is probably going to be maybe the wide shot because it has kind of all the elements in the shot in there already. And you use that as a guide to then match all your other shots to that one. So that's kind of creating the baseline. That's what you're doing in color correction, and then matching all other shots to that baseline. And then once you do that, then the next layer, the next level up you're going to do is going to be color grading. So that means you're deciding on a style and a look. Hopefully you should probably have already kind of had something in your mind before that. And then you're just implementing that look on all the images. So that's when you get to have, you know, get to be a lot more creative with what you're doing. So yeah, so that's actually, you know, speaking of workflow, Eric is going to be running a editing workflow workshop. So he'll probably touch back over this briefly during that as well. All right, so I think we're almost done with me just talking. And we can get on to the fun stuff. So yeah, let's go on to the next slide. So yeah, now we're going to actually talk about color correction and what tools and what terms are kind of related to the color correction process. So yeah, here are some basic terms that more or less, no matter what editing program you use, you will probably end up seeing these words listed in front of your screen. I'm not going to talk too much about them right now. I think it'd be better if I just showed you what they did. Just looking at some of these words, you might be like, okay, how is exposure different from brightness? How's black different from shadows? So those things might be referring to the same thing, referring to the same dark pixels, but it's how they affect those dark pixels that what makes these tools different. Contrast, a low contrast image versus a high contrast image. So contrast is just referring to the variance between your lightest pixel and your darkest pixel. So, a really bright pixel and a really dark pixel makes for a high contrast image. So that means your whites are really white, your bright parts are really bright, your dark parts are super dark. When it's a low contrast image, the difference between your brightest pixel and your darkest pixel is not as much. It's a lot flatter looking. So yeah, there's benefits to both. So that's contrast. And then the last thing I'll just touch on real quick is gamma. So gamma is, again, like a very highly technical term. Frankly, to be completely honest, there are aspects of gamma that I don't even fully understand myself. It's some sort of like logarithmic number by which lights and darks are displayed on a monitor. There actually is a gamma correction tool in Adobe Premiere Elements that I'm going to play around with. Not really how you're supposed to use it, but when I was kind of coming up with this workshop, I was trying to figure out which tools in the program that I thought were helpful and useful, and which tools could I kind of just bend and break to be able to get the look I wanted. So yeah, we're going to play around with gamma a little bit today, but it's a pretty highly technical term. There's a lot of science behind it that even I don't fully understand, just to be completely frank with you. And so yeah, those are kind of all those tools are talking about more or less the brightness and the darkness of an image, the lights and the darks, the blacks and the whites. So now let's talk about the actual color. So we're talking about color when it comes to color correction. These two little groups of letters are things you're going to come across quite a bit, HSL and RGB. You might be familiar with some of them in some way. So HSL just kind of is referring to the color itself, the quality of the color itself. So H is standing for hue, so that means like what is the color? Is it a green? Is it a blue? Is it a red? Is it a orange? And then saturation means like how rich is the color? Is it a pale green or a light green? So if you look on the screen on the left, and you see it's got like that square, it's got kind of a bright green and then a pale green. So that has to do with, so if you look at the bottom line, see how it goes from light green or pale green to bright green, and that's saturation. Luminance is how dark or bright is that green. So is it a dark green or is it a bright green? Is it a deep red curtain or is it a bright red curtain? So yeah, that's the difference between hue, saturation, and luminance. That's a tool that you can actually play around with in Premiere Elements as well as a bunch of other editing programs. Yeah, super helpful. So the next one I want to talk about is RGB, red, green, and blue. There actually are some RGB effects that you can use in Premiere Elements. I'm not going to really touch those today because they kind of, I don't know, as far as color correction, doesn't really give you, I didn't find it to be all that helpful and a little bit too complicated to figure out. But RGB, red, green, and blue, that's referring to in videos is actually all videos are recorded in 3 different channels. There's actually 3 different images that make up the image you see. So there's one image that has all the red hues, another one has all the green and all the blue. That's how the camera captures the image. And then it just piles them all together, and that makes kind of the video that you're seeing right in front of your face. So yeah, if you look at the slide, it actually have a little example. Like, I don't know if you remember on like old tube televisions, sometimes if you got like really up close to it, you could see those 3 little lines, the red, the green, the blue. And so those 3 little lines, they mix together, and that's what makes the image you see. So yeah, that's RGB, that's what that's referring to. So yeah, I think the next thing I want to talk about is actually going through examples. So I've got some examples again that I shot of some not good footage. And I tried to think of things that I think were common mistakes that happen, common errors that frankly I still make from time to time when I'm shooting. So yeah, so let's talk about how we can fix some of those. But the first example I want to talk about is when the footage is too dark. So here we go. We have a little image that I captured the other day. And you can see, yeah, it's pretty dark. I mean, you can kind of tell what's going on, not so much. Yeah, it's just a bunch of objects that I had laying around my apartment. I figured I'd arrange them in such a way so you could look at it. But yeah, so yeah, you can tell that this image is pretty dark, pretty underexposed. And there's a couple of reasons, you know, an underexposed image can happen. It could happen just because you didn't have, you know, the aperture open wide enough on your camera. It could happen because you just didn't have enough light to put on your subject. It could happen because, you know, maybe things were bright and airy at the beginning of a shoot, but then towards the end, you know, the sun was setting and it got dark. So those are all very common things that might happen. So yeah, let's talk about how we can actually fix those. So now let's go ahead and jump right over to Premiere Elements. And I've got some footage here that I have that is too dark. So let's take a look at that. All right, so yeah, here we go. We have Eric. He works in Community Partners. I got some footage of him. He's making I think like a paper snowflake. And so I got a couple different shots here. I had a wide shot, and then I cut to this close-up of him cutting the paper snowflake. You can tell it's still pretty dark. And then I cut to a different angle and even more extreme close-up, and it looks better. You know, I maybe opened up my iris a bit, corrected my mistake. I got a little shot of the paper clippings. That looks okay. And then him opening it up from another angle. I would say this image, you know, on my screen, it looks a little like orangey green. So I'll probably do some correction there. But let's focus on the beginning here. So yeah, we got footage that's too dark. So I'm going to go ahead and click on, if you look at the bottom here, I'm going to click on that clip itself in the timeline. Let me scroll down so you can see it. So here's the clip itself in the timeline. I just highlight it, and then I come all the way over to the right, and I'm going to open up adjustments, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to adjust. And there's kind of the three tools that I would suggest you stick with here are gamma correction, lighting, temperature, and tint. You know, you're going to be able to do 90% of your color correction using just those tools. So yeah, let's stick with those. Color and color RGB kind of tend to do things. It takes a lot of doing to make them do what you want. But these three tend to do a lot of the work for you. So yeah, let's click on lighting. And as with, I mean, all of these effects in here, they have like this little, oh, look at this hang glider, dude. Why don't you just click on one of these images and it'll adjust how you want it to. But I don't find that to be very helpful. So anytime you open up one of these adjustment panels, there's this little button that says more. So there we go. We always want more. All right. So here's those terms we were talking about. Okay. We've got that brightness, contrast, exposure, black and white. So those are all things that we can adjust. I think what I'm going to adjust first is probably brightness. So brightness and exposure, like I said earlier, they kind of seem like they're saying the same thing, and they kind of are. But they do affect pixels in a different way. So if you're using brightness, what it's actually going to do is every single pixel is not going to discriminate. It's going to bring the brightness of every single pixel up on your image. As opposed to exposure, that's actually going to favor your darker tones, your mid-tones, and less on the highlights. So it still brightens and darkens the image. It just affects different pixels differently. So brightness is kind of the tide that raises all boats. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the brightness here a little bit. All right, and I'm going to do maybe just kind of futz around a little bit to see how good I can get this. So yeah, so I adjusted the brightness, brought the brightness up, brought the exposure up, and then not quite giving me the look I want. After playing with those, then that's when I go up to this gamma correction. All right, and again, clicking more, and I'm going to bring up the gamma. So one thing that you should be aware of is sometimes it's helpful to kind of go to the extreme to see what you like. Maybe really go too far in that brightness. Be like, okay, yeah, that looks like garbage, and let me not do that. But when you are Yeah, so that's a good thing to do, just to find a happy medium. The other thing, you also don't want to push any of these levers too far, because it can cause some pixelization and some like breakage. I'll be able to show a better example of that once we looked at some of the other examples. But here we go. This is looking better already, you know, certainly not completely fixed, but better than what we started with. And speaking of, a good thing to do is to always kind of turn on and off your effects, kind of doing kind of like an A/B thing, seeing, you know, is it better with this one or without, with or without. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to do over here. If you look on the screen, there's a little eyeball next to the effect that I'm using, that little eyeball. And that's just showing, do you want to toggle the effect on or off? So if I turn it off, see, that's how it looks like before. That's how it looks like after. All right, before, after. So it's better. Again, by no means is this gonna win me any awards, but it's certainly better than what we started with. So yeah, I think that's probably for, you know, improving a darker image. I might come back to that in a little bit, but let's move on to another example. There we go. So yeah, so the next thing that can happen, you know, easily is your footage is too bright. You know, maybe it was a super sunny day out and maybe you forgot to turn on that ND filter on your camera. And so your image just looks super bright, super washed out. You know, maybe there's some pixels that just look like they're pure white. You can't really see anything anymore. So yeah, that can happen to you from time to time. No big deal. Well, to an extent. It's easier to fix things that are underexposed as opposed to overexposed. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, the underexposed image, you can pull some pixels back from an underexposed image. You know, you can find those pixels again. But if an image is completely blown out, super bright, you can't find those pixels again. They're kind of lost forever. So keep that in mind. So if you're ever unsure when you're out in the field, you know, how to expose your image, it's, you know, better bet to kind of over or undershoot as opposed to overshoot. Yeah, so keep that in mind. Eric was a good sport. He, you know, was the model for a lot of these shots today. So I appreciate him helping out. All right, so yeah, here we got one shot, super, super blown out. He went outside, a super sunny day. Now this one is a good example of something that, you know, probably can't be helped. You know, he looks pretty ghost-like at this point. But let's give it a shot. So yeah, to do an edit, I'm just going to select the clip itself on the timeline and then go over here to the adjustments tab. So that's the one at the top. And then let's come down to lighting again, and always hitting that more button because we need more. And so yeah, the first thing we're going to do is adjust the brightness again, take that brightness down. And you see it's bringing back some pixels, not a whole lot. And then I'm gonna bring down the exposure as well. So yeah, and you see I gotta go pretty far to even kind of see any detail in his face. And you see his cheeks and his forehead are just gone. They're kind of gone forever. This is a nice kind of, you know, kind of 90s looking stylized. It looks like he's in like a 90s grunge music video. So, you know, if I wanted that look, that's not bad. But not necessarily. So yeah, this is kind of more an example to say some things just cannot be helped. Sometimes images just go too far and you really can't bring it back. So that's kind of what happened with this one. But then he tried again and you get, you know, a slightly, he moved it down a stop or two on his camera, the aperture. So this one looks like something that we could probably salvage. So let's give that a shot. So again, click on the image, go over to your adjustments, and then click on the lighting. I'm going to click more. And then, yeah, let's do the brightness. So again, that brightness, it brings up or down all the pixels. It's that tide that raises all boats. And you can see, you know, if I really slam it down, there's still some pixels that we've lost. But you can see that you're almost gaining some color in his face, you know, like he looks not quite as ghost-like as he did before. So maybe I'll bring it down to there. Do the same with the exposure as well. Let's see, I might even play with contrast a little bit. Let's see what happens with contrast. A little bit. I don't need to do too much there. I don't see too much of a difference. And then with these blacks and these whites, so see, if I use the white, yeah, it's just gonna it's gonna make things worse. So using the white tool is really more for when your image is underexposed. What all it does is it makes those highlights that are already there even brighter. So that's what the white tool does. And that's what the black tool does. It makes the blacks that are already there even darker. So yeah, so again, yeah, this image also not as salvageable, but darn it if it isn't better than it was before, right? It looks a little bit more human. This image looks a little blue-green. That's something we can fix. I got some other examples of some blue-green footage, so maybe we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, let's move on to another example. Okay, so yeah, so here's another issue that you might come up, is when your footage looks washed out. Now, some cameras, including the one that I own at home, I own a Canon C100, some cameras just kind of skew towards a more washed out image. And there are some benefits to that, actually, frankly, because it gives you more control. If the image is lower contrast, there's a little bit more washed out, that means that there's a lot of room I can go. So if my image is kind of, flat as far as like what's dark and what's bright, I can move those pixels up and down how I like. But if the image is already kind of an extreme contrast, there's only so much I can do, So if you have a low contrast image, you got a lot of wiggle room. You can go a lot of places. So yeah, I wanted to talk about, shooting flat. That's what that's called. A little too much to do today, but just something to keep in your head that you can actually, if you capture your image in a way that is a lower contrast, then you kind of can do a little bit more when it comes to this part of the process. But yeah, let's look at, I've got a washed out clip here that we can look at here on my computer. So there we go, we got washed out footage. So I went outside the other day very haphazardly trying to catch this image of a plane. It was very last second. I was like, can I do it? And I just barely did it. And so one of the reasons why this looks washed out is, one, it was overexposed. I overexposed the image. Two, when it's that far away, when an image is that far away, and when it's up in the sky like that, and light is kind of refracting off of all these different places, then it can it kind of washes out your image. So sometimes the sun can kind of wash out that image for you. Okay, so yeah, so here's my washed out image. So I'm gonna go ahead and select my airplane. And then I'm gonna come over here to this gamma correction again. All right, and the reason I'm doing this is because the gamma correction mostly affects the midtones of your project. All right, so usually, when it goes from light to dark, it's like a straight line as far as your camera is concerned. I'm gonna bring down the midtones a little bit. So yeah, so let me just bring that down a hair. Oh, other way. Okay, you see already like the difference between here to here. A little bit more definition on that airplane, on the bottom side of that airplane. All right, so then after that, I'm gonna move on to the lighting section yet again. And here's a really good example of some kind of pixelating and breakage that can kind of occur with an image if you push it too hard. So I was futzing around this image earlier, and I was like, oh, I wonder how much of that blue sky I can get back. And so if you look over here, you see I brought that brightness all the way down, and you see, yeah, it's sure, no, I mean, the sky looks blue now, but man, does it look like it's an impressionistic painting. It kind of looks really pixelated, the difference between, there's a lot of solid colors kind of going on there, and not a really smooth transition from one pixel to the next. So that's an example of what could happen if you take your image too far. So as nice as that blue might look, as nice as it is to have that blue, the image doesn't really look real anymore. It looks, again, like a 90s painting. So I'm just gonna take the brightness down just a bit. Again, with the exposure, I was gonna take the exposure down just a bit. You see, if I go too far, I get right back into that same problem. So there's really only so far I can go. And then I'm gonna bring up the contrast a little bit. That's another thing that definitely helps with washed out images. It's just bringing up that contrast. So yeah, here we go. So let's look at our little A/B test. So yeah, here's a before and after, not counting the gamma correction. But yeah, see how much blue we get back from that sky? Not bad. I mean, I would say I probably still pushed it a little too far. Looking at, see, here's one example. I'm looking at a monitor in the studio, and man, does that thing look like it's really just ripped to shreds. But if I look on my monitor on my laptop, the image looks pretty nice. So yeah, it's just that all the more important to just kind of test things out on different laptops or screens, monitors, before committing to kind of an extreme choice. But again, these are extreme examples. You know, I'm pushing this thing pretty far. Let's see, I can maybe even bring the blacks up a little bit. Yeah, okay, all right. So yeah, so there's a washed out image. I was able to kind of bring it back. And then I think I just have one more example I want to hop to. We're doing okay on time here, I think. Yeah. So I've got this clip, again, just kind of going right outside Can TV, that big open field. I don't know if you know it. And it is this image I got, like, it was the sun setting, because, you know, the sun sets at freaking 4 o'clock these days. And it almost looks good. I mean, it looks actually, frankly, again, it looks weirdly better on that monitor than it does on my computer here. So yeah, you know, goes to show. But I wonder if I can pull even more color out of that sky, you know. So I'm going to again adjust the lighting here. So I have it selected on the timeline, come over to the adjustments tab yet again, and select the lighting. And then, of course, hit more. All right, and so yeah, like I was saying earlier, brightness affects every pixel indiscriminately. Exposure favors more towards the darks in the midtones. So that's telling me right now I probably want to futz around more with brightness than with exposure, because, you know, the dark parts here of this image of like the train cars and the trees and then the poles and all that jazz, all those darker tones, they look fine to me. You know, I don't really need to futz with those too much. It's really the bright parts that I need to play around with. So yeah, I'm gonna bring down the brightness some, see how far I can get. Yeah, and already, yeah, it's kind of, sure I am losing a little bit of it's getting a little darker in the midtones, but look at that sunset's looking, you know, quite a bit better. I got way more color going on there. So that was, I think, a worthwhile effort. And then, you know, what I might do is I might raise up the blacks on this. Oh, wait, no, I'll just make it darker. So I might, let's see, maybe what happens if I bring down the contrast a bit? If I bring down the contrast a bit, then yeah, I kind of gain back some of the colors on the bottom. But yeah, so now, you know, I mean, obviously my focus is pulled away from looking at the kind of the ground part of the image and more towards the sky. Which is my intention. So, you know, your eye kind of automatically kind of gets pulled up towards the sky a little bit more, partially because your eye is always pulled towards the brightest part of the image. But now the brightest part of that image looks, you know, better. It's not just pure white anymore. It's got some color to it. Yeah, one other quick thing I want to show you, with not quite all of these shots, but some of them, is playing around with the saturation. So I'm going to jump over to here where it says color. So here's that HSL I was talking about, hue, saturation, and lightness. And let's go to more. And we can play with all those things, including vibrance. But yeah, if I just saturate this image just a little bit, you know, you can really go too far on this one. See, that looks, again, pretty ridiculous. But if I just bring up the saturation just like at the tiniest bit, you know, I don't want to do too much. And again, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to turn this off and on, decide whether or not I like it, you know, if it has gone too far. I would say no. I would say that brings an interesting amount of color that I think I like. So yeah, you know, I'm going to keep that image as is. So yeah, so I'm happy with how we landed there. Let's try to do a quick before and after with that lighting. Yeah, so here we were where we were before. Here's where we are now. You know, worth the effort, I would say. Getting a little bit more color in that sky, making it a little bit more of a sunset looking image. All right, so yeah, those are kind of the issues that you might run into when you have issues with kind of the aperture of how your camera's set or the light that is getting into your camera. Those are kind of the most common issues, it being underexposed, overexposed, or washed out. And those are some tools that you have to fix that error. Again, you know, some things can't be helped all the way. And also, you know, to be completely honest, you know, this program can only do so much. If you had a different editing program like Premiere Pro or even DaVinci Resolve. DaVinci Resolve is actually a program that's meant to be a color correcting program, but has actually kind of become a bit more of an editing program for some reason. And it's free, so worth checking out maybe. Okay, but anyway, so let's talk about some other issues you might have with footage that you've shot. There we go. So yes, the footage feels too orange, too blue. This is pretty common. This is going to happen to you 9 times out of 10 because things weren't properly white balanced. And I'm not blaming you. Sometimes you're on the go. Sometimes you're kind of running and gunning. You don't really have time to adjust your color or your white balance, every time you go from one place to another. I've had experiences with that myself, especially if I'm shooting, something that's real life, verite footage or documentary footage, and you're running around from place to place. Sometimes you just need to capture the moment and worry about the color later. So like, I totally get it. But also, if you have time, please constantly make sure that your color is looking good, making sure that you're white balancing your camera. But here we go. We got an image where I got on the left side, it's looking too orange, almost orangey green, and then on the right side, it's looking pretty. It almost looks like we're in a surgical hospital type scenario. It looks very stark blue. So yeah. So let's see what we can do about that. So I have over here. See, I have this is my little wide shot with the sunset, and then I cut to a little close up here, my two little stop signs, and it looks awfully blue. Yeah, you can definitely see its effect with how it affects the red. The red just looks kind of like muddy and almost kind of tending towards gray a little bit because the footage was not properly white balanced. But that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that piece of footage in the timeline, and then I'm going to come down to temperature and tint. That's what I'm going to play around with. Because frankly, I'm pretty happy with how this thing is exposed. I think I like how the darks and the lights look. I got some blue in the sky, so the sky doesn't look washed out. So I'm just going to stick with that, frankly. So let's play around with the temperature and tint. So when it comes to correcting color issues themselves in your footage, I would say 70% of the work that you need to do can be fixed with just using these two little sliders. As simple as that. So temperature, that means, some temperature, just think about like, blue, cold, orangey, warmer, hot. So that's what it means as far as temperature. So that means if I bring the slider to the left, it's going to make my image even bluer. So obviously I don't want to go that way. I want to go the other way. So here it is, making my image a little bit more warmer, a little bit more like it's happening maybe during sunset. So, and this will tend to happen when you adjust the temperature. You might get some greens start kind of popping up. Now this image looks a little green casted a little bit. So that's when I'm going to come over here to tint. So that's tint affects the greens and the purpley magentas, the magenta. That's kind of what tint does. So if I were to go to the left, see, obviously it makes it pretty pukey looking. So if I go to the right, you see now all of a sudden this is looking a lot more real. And I'm pretty happy with that. So yeah, just two little slider adjustments there. Let's do before and after. See, it looks pretty darn good. I'm not unhappy with that. So yeah, turning that on and off, I can see that, yeah, I think I'm happy with it. And always good to compare to your wide shot. So let me go back to my wide shot. All right, so there's my wide. And then and you can see the two little stop signs, kind of the bottom middle of the frame. So then if I come back over to my close-up shot, yeah, not bad. I would say those look like they're more or less existing in the same space. I could probably bring a little bit more orange in here if I wanted to. Yeah, since that image looks a little bit more orange. But yeah, I would say, now these two images are looking far more like they happened at the same span of time as each other. I can maybe bring down the exposure a little bit on this, and that might get me where I want to go. Click that more button, of course. Bring down the exposure. Yeah, there we go. So now it looks maybe even more like the image before it. Not bad. Can maybe play around with the saturation. Plenty of other things I could do, but I think this is good enough for where we are. Okay, how we doing? I want to save time for questions at the end. I've got a question. Oh, vibrance and saturation. That's a good question. Between vibrance and saturation. I think, to be honest, it's like something that I can't fully describe. I'm not very good describing it, but it does have a bit of a different effect. So saturation is really just making every pixel in there, whatever color it already is, it's making it more intense. And then let's see what happens if I play the saturation here. So let me reset, or with the vibrance rather. And so I think vibrance it does have a different effect. It's a little bit more subtle. I think it doesn't make the colors as primary like, because if you do a fully saturated red, it's going to look like it's a primary color red. So the vibrance kind of affects in a different way that I unfortunately cannot fully describe. I'm not an expert in this, but I myself have always wondered really what's the difference between saturation and vibrance. And sometimes, I would say not 9 times out of 10 in most programs, I would suggest you do saturation over vibrance. In this program, however, I found that vibrance kind of looks better than saturation. Saturation kind of makes it a little too cartoony for me. But good question. We got another one? Okay, so I've got a question that's talking about if you have your camera set to auto iris and the lights and the darks kind of vary wildly, what do you do about it? Well, I mean, don't use auto iris, but that's not the situation you're in. You already shot something that has that issue. I think the best thing you could do is probably kind of try to find moments where like the aperture is kind of the same in that clip and split it at each portion. So maybe at the first half of the interview or whatever you shot, it was too dark, and in the second half it gets too bright. I would put that clip into 2 separate clips, split into 2 clips, and edit each of those separately, color correct each of those separately. That's the best I could tell you. I don't have an example of that in front of me. Otherwise, I would totally do a demo on that. That's a good question, though. Maybe I'll make a little video on it or something. Yeah, I think the suggestion that Eric just said in my ear is keyframing things. However, I don't know if you can keyframe these effects. I don't know if you can put keyframes of these effects. Maybe you can. I haven't really played around with it. That's a good question. I'm going to save that for later. But thank you for asking. Okay, so yeah, let's move on to the rest of the presentation. I think there's only 1 or 2 things I want to talk about for color correction before we move on to color grading. Footage feels green. So same thing with, we're gonna use that temperature and tint. Footage looking too green is actually an issue that can happen with many different cameras. Some cameras just tend to skew green. My camera at home, it tends to skew green. That's just because every camera is just kind of set up differently, and sometimes that's just kind of how the image comes out. Even very nicer, much more expensive cameras than I have. The Red camera, that's a very expensive camera that gets used on movies, and that camera tends to skew green. Everything kind of skews a little more, like everybody looks sick when they're on camera. So that's just something you just got to fix in post. You can only do so much. Or there's things that are called LUTs, lookup tables. Again, far beyond what we can do here. I don't even know if we can download a LUT into this program. I think you can, but that's for another day, another year. All right, so yeah, let's look at some green stuff, huh? So I think I have over here, if it'll play it, I've got cranberries 3 ways here. We had a bowl of cranberries in the office the other day. I figured I'd shoot it for a second. And I think, so I've got 1 cranberry bowl on the right, or sorry, on the left rather, that looks kind of underexposed and orange. Another one in the middle that looks awfully green to me, but it looks properly exposed. And then the one on the right, that one looks too blue. All right. So I just want to give you a look at just like, here's what the extremes can look like. Here's all the different ways a bowl of cranberries can look like, depending on how you properly white balance your camera. So yeah, so there's a lot of different things that can happen, but let's just futz around with the green one, eh? So that's let's see, let me make sure I have my layers how I want them. Okay, yeah, there's the green layer. Let me just kind of undo all this little fancy editing that I did here. It's not really fancy. I just put a crop on it. Okay, so yeah, here's this green looking bowl of cranberries. And then you could even see, just to help us out even better, Eric actually goes to grab one. So yeah, when you are doing color correction, a lot of the examples I have weren't exactly the people, other than Eric earlier, but you really got to prioritize the people first. So you should be color correcting to make sure people's skin tones look like human skin tones, and you got to worry less about whether or not that curtain looks like the perfect purple that you wanted in the first place. So yeah, whenever you're color correcting, definitely keep your focus on the skin tone. Everything else should be kind of incidental after that. So yeah, so let's go ahead and check away at this shot. So again, I have it selected. Here I have cranberry 3 on level 3. And then I come over to temperature and tint. I click on that more button. And let's see how much better it can get if I just adjust that tint. So I pull it to the right to make it a little bit more magenta. And it's doing something. I don't mind it. I think, you see now it's kind of pulling a little bit more orange out of there more than I want. So I might take that temperature and pull it towards the left. So now that looks quite a bit better already. Eric looks like a human person a little bit more. It's maybe a little too pink. If it looks too pink, that means your tint is on too far. So I might take that tint back a little bit. So there we go. Before, after, before, after. So, things that white's looking a little too pink still to me. The white on the table behind the cranberries. Yeah, when I'm looking at that, I kind of feel like it looks too pink still, especially on that monitor. On this monitor, it looks not bad. On that monitor, it looks too pink. So, maybe I'm just gonna have to find a happy medium between these two shots that I'm looking at. Oh, okay. So yeah, just another question about calibrating your camera or your monitor or both. Well, I would say both. So, yeah, there are some things that you can set on your camera. I'm sure production services is not happy about me telling you this, but you can actually futz around with the quality of your image on the camera quite a bit inside the camera menu settings. You can fuss around with things like something like the master pedestal. So that has to do with the black. How black are your blacks? How white are your whites? The contrast. So you can futz around with that in your camera quite a bit. I would advise to only do that a small amount, because you don't want to go so extreme on the darks or so extreme on the brights, and then you won't be able to change your mind later, where it comes to in post, you can kind of change things around. So when we're talking about monitors, yeah, definitely try your best to color calibrate your monitors. Some monitors and some computers, on your home laptop or computer, there are some things that utility tools that you can use in your own computer that actually help to calibrate your monitor. I could run through it. And then there's also, very expensive monitor calibration tools that exist out there that I don't even own one, that you can use to actually make it so it's like true color. I would suggest you probably invest in a better computer and a better editing program before you buy a color calibrating tool. But many monitors in your own on your own computer can actually you can go through and calibrate your monitor. That's a good question. So let's go on and let's kind of talk about color grading for the last 7 or 8 minutes that we have here. So yeah, now that you've kind of gone through all of your footage, you've kind of figured out what all the issues are, and hopefully you've fixed them. You've again, achieved that plutonic ideal for all of your images. So then you get to do some more fun stuff. So that's color grading. So again, color theory, color grading, color in film has a major effect on how the audience perceives your piece, no matter what that piece is. So I would really encourage you to think a little bit more heavily about what colors you're choosing in your piece. So, obviously I wanted you to feel kind of calm and relaxed while you're watching this. So I put on a, blue or purple images color behind me on the curtain. That has an effect on your mood. I'm wearing a nice colorful sweater. So that'll, maybe makes this thing seem a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting. So again, yeah, your colors you choose on the day of can have a major effect on the interpretation of your piece. But you can also push those colors, push people's emotions in one way or direction. or the other. So yeah, I think we have some examples that I have. Oh yeah, let's talk about this. So yeah, for color grading, there's not only for mood and tone, um, it does other things. You can use color grading for other things. So mood and tone is definitely number one thing that color grading can do. Number two is actually color grading is used pretty significantly when you want, maybe you shot something at a certain time of day and you wanted to make it seem like it was shot at a different time of day. Usually shooting day for night is a common thing that filmmakers do. So if you wanted whatever you shot to kind of seem like it happened in more dark timing, then you can absolutely do that. And then the last thing you can do it for is kind of changing the interpretation of a scene within your piece. So maybe, and that's when I'm talking about, maybe there's a flashback or a dream sequence or some sort of hallucinatory weird thing going on. You can use color grading to inform the viewer, like, hey, what's happening here is different from what's happening everywhere else. So yeah, those are kind of the other things that color grading can do. I would love, if we can, show some of I have some examples from film and other things about, they're just stills. So yeah, this was a image that has a bunch, it's got the whole rainbow going on here, of all these different ways that, color in film can look, and it can affect the mood of your story in different ways. These are very extreme ways to pull your color. So that whole blue cast image, it's almost all of it's blue. There's almost no other color. That means it's monochromatic. Same for the one on the left of it, that green one, there's almost no other color. It's almost all green and black. It's a monochromatic palette. Most of these are monochromatic palettes, frankly. They're kind of all staying in one color zone. So that's an extreme way to kind of do color. But there's more subtle ways you could do it. And I would suggest you probably, try with the subtle before you go to this extreme. So I have up here, I don't know if you'll be able to read it at home. Make sure to have this whole presentation. I'm going to email it to you guys after the fact so you can look at it. I also have a bunch of helpful links, cool videos, and other just like blogs and stuff that I think would be really cool to take a look at. If you're really interested in color, if this is something that is appealing to you right now, you can dig a lot deeper than what I'm doing today. But this little chart is just showing you kind of what kind of emotions certain colors tend to give the viewer. So those kind of warmer, redder colors that kind of tends towards anger or rage, kind of negative emotions. But it also can tend towards more like romantic emotions, just these are kind of things that, maybe seem a little bit obvious to you as I'm telling you, but once you start thinking about it in a filmmaking perspective, you can really play around with the viewer's emotions. Kind of like yellow typically means happy, but yellow can also kind of mean intense. It could also mean kind of, naivete a little bit. Yellow can mean that. And then we got some greens. Greens can, you'll see, once you start watching some movies, any sci-fi film, they are using a lot of greens a lot of the time, especially if it's like some sort of alien-based or creature-based thing. Green kind of just gears towards kind of, scary or sickliness. So yeah, green is kind of what gets used for that. Which is why we tend to like suggest you don't put green, on a backlight or on the curtain, because it kind of just, it kind of denotes like ill or sick sometimes. So, it suggests against it. And then I've got some little color palettes I just want to run through here, just to give you an idea of what to look for. So this is a movie called The Florida Project. It's a good movie. You should check it out. And this movie actually is following along the lives of these children that live in this little, it's like a hotel in Florida or a motel in Florida. And you see everything looks very candy colored because it's all through the children's perspective. That's kind of the effect that the color had here. It kind of made this world seem a little bit more wondrous than it really was. So yeah, that's kind of what that color palette does for this film, is that it kind of makes things seem, because a lot of dark things do happen in this film, but you're seeing it through the child's perspective. So it kind of is warped more towards what the child would perceive. This another movie called Birdman came out several years ago. I like this one just because it has all the colors in it. It has a lot of colors. It's kind of punching in the face with the colors that's going on here. And this scene, I think from what I remember, is happening towards the end of the film, where the protagonist kind of is having some sort of renaissance with himself. He's kind of discovering some things about himself. So all these like bright kind of intense colors, you know, it makes the whole scene feel bright and intense. So, you know, just another thing that can happen. Here we got the other side of the spectrum. There's this movie, science fiction movie called Arrival. It came out a couple of years ago. You see there's almost no color in this one. It's pretty devoid of color. It's got some like really, really gray blues, really, really, really kind of blue, gray, paley greens. You know, it adds a lot of a very sinister feel, kind of scary, kind of somber. So yeah, definitely a completely different mood. Um, and then the next one I want to show you is The Truman Show. This one is from the, you know, spoiler alert from this movie that came out, what, like 20 years ago. Truman gets out. And so this is from the last scene of The Truman Show, where he finally kind of escapes his lifelong prison. And it's very serene, very calming, these colors. You know, you can see he's found resolve in his own life just from the colors that this image is showing you. So yeah, that's a good example there. And then I can't talk about color without talking about the Matrix for whatever reason. Yeah, so this Matrix was definitely one of the movies that I was like, oh, okay, I guess if you want anything to seem intense or scary or wrong, just put a green cast on it. So yeah, this movie, you see all these images, they all look kind of green and sickly, kind of like how Neo feels when he's living this very mundane life that feels like it shouldn't be what it is, but it is. Until it isn't. So yeah, so that's kind of what you get from this image when you're looking at it. It kind of feels wrong, feels sickly, feels bad. So you can tell that Neo wants to get out of it, because you as a viewer want to get out of it, because you're like, this is green and gross and everybody looks sick and bad. So yeah, there are some tools. I'm going to talk about them. I won't be able to play. Let me try to play around with them real quick. So there's a couple tools that you can use. There's a tool called the three-way color corrector. There's a tool called the HSL tuner. And then there's another tool called the split tone and tint. I would suggest when you're getting started, playing around with color grading, try split tone and tint first. That's going to do a lot of heavy lifting for you without you trying to kind of do a lot of minor adjustments that you would be doing with, say, the HSL tuner or the three-way color corrector. So I'm just going to real quick, because I want to get to questions, slap on a color graded look onto an image that I have. See, I got this so much shaky footage of the snake that I saw in the Indiana Dunes back in September of last year. Oh my gosh. Yeah, and so, you know, this image, I color corrected it already. I did some adjustments to the lighting. So I had to adjust because my camera always kind of takes things a little washed out. So I pumped up the contrast on it. And then I also, again, adjusted the tint a little bit. It skews a little bit colder. I made it a little bit warm. But what I really want to do is make it seem like it's happening more in like a desert setting, a little bit more like hot, intense. You know, I want to make it feel like it's happening in a different place. So I'm going to do that. I kind of created already a look for it. And so this is the way that I would suggest that you move from color correction to color grading. Color correction, you see so far, all I've been doing is making adjustments to the clips themselves. When you're doing color grading, I would suggest, this is the method I would suggest you use, is using what's called an adjustment layer. So that's something you can add on top of your layer and it'll affect any layer below it. So, so right now I have what's called an adjustment layer and I put effects on this adjustment layer. So I'm gonna drag it, I'm gonna put it on top of my footage. And you see, even though it just looks like a black square here, if I take it off, it should have changed. Oh, did it? Maybe I deleted everything off of here. That would be too bad. Oh, I did. Okay, well, it looks like I'm gonna have to do this from scratch, guys. All right, so I have that layer, that snake layer. It's just an adjustment layer. Nothing's changed on it yet. And then I'm going to go into this effects tab. And then I'm going to add, I'm gonna click search. I'm gonna go that tint. Yeah, this tint here. I'm gonna grab it and drop it here. And then you see it says map black and map white. So that means I could make my darker tones, I want them to kind of skew towards the orange. All right, I'm gonna do this real quick. Skew towards the orange. And then I map the white, I want it to kind of skew towards maybe some more yellow. All right, so yeah, and then I'm going to maybe tone it down just a little bit. All right, so this is kind of a real quick and dirty. I might make that orange look a little darker. Okay, and then I make that yellow look a little less green. All right, cool. So yeah, so you see already, it's not as good as the thing I made earlier, but it's, but it's okay. But yeah, you see I kind of added that kind of that yellow and that kind of reddish brown orangey to this image. And so it really does change the mood of it. You know, it kind of feels a little bit more intense. If I turn it off and on, you can see the difference pretty starkly. And then, yeah, so let me try the split and tone. So that one, it kind of does the same thing in a slightly different way. It has a slightly different effect. I haven't quite figured out, they both kind of do the same thing, but a little different. I haven't figured out which one I like better, but let's try that split tone. Yeah, do we have any more questions? If not, I'll just keep on. Oh, okay, so I have somebody asking a question about fluorescent versus LED lighting. Yeah, so as far as like what to use, man, I mean, some of it's almost personal preference as opposed to if you want fluorescent lighting or incandescent, because there are, or no, LED you said. So yeah, LEDs kind of skews a little bit more blue cold, and then fluorescent kinds of, go a little bit more towards the greener side. But it depends on the lighting kit that you have. Sometimes there are some lighting kits that are fluorescent lighting kits that are very good. They're really good at it. So so yeah, it kind of depends on the lighting kit you have. I can't say one way or the other. It kind of, at the end of the day, is a bit of a personal preference. I know Eric back there in the control room, he prefers the old school lighting with the incandescent bulbs because it all skews a little bit warmer. Like it feels a little bit more warm, a little bit more natural, kind of like the incandescent bulbs that you have in your house. And then a lot of modern day lighting is done with either LEDs or fluorescent bulbs. I think there's benefits to both. So I don't think I can give you a hard yes or no on that. I'm playing Switzerland in this one. Do we have any other questions from people? No? Any other questions? No? So, okay, cool. So then let's play around with, you know what I really want to play around with? Let's play around with the HSL tuner, because this split tone tool that I have up now, yeah, it's affecting things in a way that I kind of like more. It's kind of has a little bit more of a subtle effect than what that tint does. So it looks like I can kind of get it to do what I want a little bit more. So again, I've got the highlights and the shadows. It kind of does the same thing, just in a slightly different way. And then maybe I want to make the darks kind of more browny orangey. Okay. So there we go. This is pretty intense. I think that's the issue with the split tone, is that maybe it is a little bit more intense, but it kind of affects the image in a way that I find to be a little bit more appealing. Maybe I can bring down the saturation some. Yeah, this is looking pretty extreme, eh? But if I kind of bring it down a little bit, yeah, on that monitor it looks different than on here. And oh geez, I have no idea what it looks like on your computer at home. You might be like, what is this woman doing? But yeah, so yeah, this is a different way. So yeah, here's that split tone, the look. Here it is, if it'll do it, turn off, please. Here it is without anything. And then here it is with that tint that I did, if it'll turn back on. There we go. So yeah, there's just, two different ways to get to slightly different effect, but an effect nonetheless. Yeah, and then if we got 5 more minutes, I would love to show you the HSL tuner. So that gives you a lot of control, that HSL tuner. You can change, you can have an even more discerning effect on all different parts of your image. So I'm gonna go, I grabbed, so here I got some more footage. This is like a little beach scene again at the Indiana Dunes. And so I got like some water and then some marshy, grassy stuff. And maybe I want it to seem like more like it's happening in the nighttime than the daytime. And I'm gonna try to use I would probably end up using the split toner for this, but let's try to use the HSL tool. Okay, so there it is. I'm just dragging it, dropping it onto my adjustment layer. Oh, just real quick. So to make an adjustment layer, go to your Project Assets tab, go to that tiny little submenu that does a million different things, and go to where it says New Item, and the first thing you can pick is Adjustment Layer. All right, so there you go. And then you can call it whatever you like. You know, be organized. So this is you know, another one. So yeah, that's how you generate an adjustment layer. And you see, I can make that adjustment layer apply to as many clips as I want. So as opposed to, you know, you would think, oh, so I put this effect on the clip of the beach. Now I've got to copy and paste that clip onto every single beach shot that's in my entire piece. You don't got to do that. If you do it on adjustment layer, you just got to do it once, and then you just put that adjustment layer on top of all of the images or on your entire piece. If you're doing the same color grading look for the whole piece, which I would suggest you start out doing. You know, don't go too crazy. All right, so yeah, real quick. So we got about 5 minutes left, I think. So let's see. So if we have my HSL tuner here on the right. So again, hue, saturation, and luminance. So I would use hue with extreme caution. If you adjust the hue on some of these things, it can be a really extreme difference that you might really not have the level of control that you would like. But things like saturation and luminance, so that's, you know, how saturated, how deep one color is over whether or not it's bright or dark, you know, that's can be a lot more fun. So let's just play around. So see, looking at this image here, you know, there's a lot of blues and greens. So let's see what happens if I really bump up the saturation on those blues. You know, it affects it in a much more subtle way, I find, than doing it. Let's see. Yeah, is it doing much? Yeah, see, it's pretty subtle. But you see how I kind of like what it's doing though. And it's really just affecting the saturation of the blue parts of my image. All right. If I were to do, let's see, I'm trying to think of what even other color is in this thing. I would say, you know, maybe if I had to guess, the little wood parts. Yeah, if I adjusted the yellow, saturation of the yellow, no, not a whole lot of difference. No. So yeah, this is really only affecting that. But if I were to adjust the hue, all right, so I have the awkward and the blue. That seems to be the two channels that this image has the most of. If I change the hue of the blue, you see I can make it tint it towards a little bit more of like a seafoamy green. You know, now it looks like I'm almost in Key West or something. Or I could go the other way and make it seem like I'm at, you know, this kind of almost feels like I'm in, I don't know, Maryland or something, that deeper blue. So yeah, yeah, you see how much it kind of, this just feels a little bit more summery, and I'm in the more the kind of greener tones than opposed to the other one. It just feels a little bit colder. So yeah, that minor changes like that can make a big difference. So yeah, I think I might just leave it there. Yeah, you know, I definitely changed the mood of this. I would say this is maybe a little too extreme. I would have to look at a couple different monitors. I think I'm just looking at it right now. I think I've got a little bit of breakage going on. But so yeah, you know, do a little bits, all right? Definitely, you know, explore with the extremes and then scale back. But your end piece, you know, you really can't push these tools too far, and even in the nicest of programs. All right, so yeah, I hope that maybe this kind of demystified some of the notions between color correction and color grading. Maybe now you can think a little bit more creatively about how you want to use color in your own projects. And again, that color should be something that you think about in every stage of production. Don't just wait till the end to do something. So yeah, hopefully you had a good time. You know, shoot me some questions at training@cangv.org at the email. If you have any more questions, if you want to talk about color grading, color correction, I'd be happy to do it. Send me your crappy footage. You know, I can try to give you some tips. So yeah, hopefully you had a good time, and I think that's all I got for you guys. See you next time. Have a good one.